We can now cross live to Tel Aviv and talk to our correspondent, Blake Sifton. Blake, Rubio and Vance in the region so soon after this flare-up of violence that we saw in the last couple of days. How stable is this ceasefire realistically?
Good evening. When Vice President Vance arrived earlier this week, he said that the timing of his visit had nothing to do with events of the previous 48 hours. By that, he meant the very serious outbreak of violence that we saw in Gaza on Sunday. And certainly Vance, Rubio, as well as Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been very positive about the state of the ceasefire and the potential for it to hold. They've referred to any flare-ups of violence as essentially peaks and valleys, or as we heard just now from Marco Rubio, twists and turns. But their presence so soon after that flare-up of violence is being seen as a sign that the Trump administration is concerned by the threats to this ceasefire and that they do need to work hard to keep it on track, especially amid concerns that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could be considering abandoning the ceasefire if he comes under the pressure from his far-right coalition partners. Now, there are also reports that the United States was very upset with Israel for their response on Sunday to the Hamas attack that killed 2 of their soldiers in Rafah. In response, they carried out a wave of airstrikes across Gaza, targeting some 20 locations, and killed 44 Palestinians. And there are reports that when Vance spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he delivered a firm message that the ceasefire must continue.
Blake, the plan mentions disarming Hamas. Is there any international appetite for taking on that role, especially because Hamas have been, well, so steadfast against that one point?
So according to the text of the 20-point peace plan that President Trump put forward, the International Stabilization Force was meant to enter Gaza to assist with demilitarization and assist securing Gaza in order for the Israeli military to fully withdraw from Gaza. Of course, the Israeli military is still in some 53% of Gaza. But yesterday, JD Vance, before leaving Israel, said that the International Stabilization Force would take the leading role in disarming Hamas. That's the first time anyone has said that. And of course, disarming Hamas is essentially the most difficult obstacle to be overcome in this entire process. Hamas have shown no willingness to be disarmed. They've suggested perhaps they would give up their offensive weapons like rockets, but not their small arms, not their guns. Vance said that the U.S. would not have soldiers on the ground in Gaza and that other countries have expressed an interest in joining the International Stabilization Force, but we still don't know which countries would be involved, when they would be assembled, and when they would be ready to deploy. There are reports that Indonesia and Azerbaijan have expressed interest, but they want it to be a UN-mandated peacekeeping force. And this idea that this force could potentially come in direct conflict with Hamas by trying to disarm them, perhaps against their will, could very well see many countries think twice about participating in this force. We need to remember that the Israeli military fought Hamas for 2 years and has fought multiple wars against Hamas, and they've failed to pacify the group, let alone an international peacekeeping force.
Speaking of points on this ceasefire deal, Israel promised for more aid to enter into Gaza. Why is Israel not honouring those commitments, especially when it comes to allowing the influx of aid right now?
Well, according to the text of the ceasefire, Israel was meant to allow some 600 trucks of aid into Gaza every single day. That's the amount of aid that the UN and other organizations say is needed to meet the needs of the people. Far less than that is entering Gaza each day. The numbers of trucks, as far as we understand, are usually between 80 to some 300 trucks. Now, the UN has said that the situation on the ground in Gaza is catastrophic. We've heard from the WHO. They've said that the effects of malnutrition will last for generations, and that at least a quarter of Gaza's population is still suffering from food insecurity. So the need is great, and the United Nations is calling on Israel to open all of the crossings into Gaza so that aid can flow freely into the Strip. For now, only 2 crossings are open, and crucially, none that go directly into northern Gaza, which is the area gripped by famine, according to food experts. A crucial crossing that we're also watching closely is the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza. It's been closed for much of the last year and a half since Israeli forces seized the city of Rafah. It used to be a major conduit for aid, and everyone hopes that it can open. We understood that on Monday it was supposed to open to pedestrian traffic to allow people in badly needed medical care as well as badly injured to leave Gaza and others to return to Gaza. And then after that, hopefully it would open to truck traffic. However, following that outbreak of violence, there is now no timeline for Rafah to open.
Let's talk about this idea, Blake, of a humanitarian hub and also the so-called Gaza humanitarian belt. What exactly would that look like if it were to come into play?
So this is a preliminary idea at this stage, we should clarify, but there are reports that the U.S. is considering establishing, as you say, these humanitarian hubs, and they would replace the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That was that very controversial Israeli and American-backed organization that distributed aid at distribution sites in 4 locations across Gaza. Now, according to this plan, these hubs would be based along the yellow line. There would be 12 to 16 of them along the yellow line, which is the area where Israeli forces have withdrawn to during the ceasefire. However, there's been multiple instances of Palestinians straying too close to that line and being shot and killed by Israeli forces. People often don't know where the line is, to the point where the Israeli military is now putting up yellow signs and big yellow concrete blocks to highlight where the line is. And of course, when the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was operating, it was staffed by American military contractors, and aid seekers had to travel long distances through Israeli military lines, and there was near daily deadly incidents where aid seekers were shot and killed. So we do not want to see a repeat of that, essentially a new version of that with aid distribution sites built along this very dangerous yellow line. And there is also talk that the United Nations and other organizations would need to source their aid from these hubs in order to distribute it elsewhere in Gaza. Similarly to before, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation only operated 4 sites across Gaza, and limitations like that could very well see a limit on how much aid is available to be distributed in Gaza.
Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv, there we must leave it. Thank you so much for joining us.